As we do every year, it's now time to unpack the findings a little bit more and to hear from different voices in policy, industry, and grassroots action with our panel discussion. With this, I would now like to invite our panelists on stage one by one. I invite Jalaj Dani, Director of the Board of Pratham Education Foundation, to the stage. Jalaj wears many hats. He's a co-promoter of Asian Paints and is a visionary leader focused on creating meaningful impact. With over 30 years of corporate experience, he drives innovation at companies such as Adverb Technologies and Endure Air Systems. Deeply committed to education, he supports initiatives such as Pratham Education Foundation and the ASER report to improve learning outcomes in India. As co-founder of Dani Foundation, he champions sports, education, skill development, and community empowerment. Through his philanthropic efforts, Jalaj is dedicated to fostering inclusive and sustainable social progress. Welcome, Mr. Dani. Next up, we have Deepika Mogili Shetty. Deepika is Chief of Policy and Partnerships at Ekstep Foundation, where she works on diverse projects associated with creating and adopting digital public goods and infrastructure. She also leads Bachpan Manao Badhte Jao, an initiative that leverages the power of networks and narratives to bring attention to the abundance and possibilities in the first 8 years of childhood with over 100 organizations. Welcome, Deepika. Next on stage, we have Amarjeet Sinha, Senior Fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress. Amarjeet was earlier posted as advisor to the Prime Minister, an Indian Administrative Services Officer of the Bihar cadre of the 1983 batch. He retired in December 2019 as Secretary of the Department of Rural Development, Government of India. He has 40 years of experience in government, largely in the rural and social sectors. He has played a major role in designing the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and the National Rural Health Mission. Welcome on stage, sir. Then we have Sridhar Rajagopalan. Sridhar is the co-founder and Chief Learning Officer of Educational Initiatives, or EI. A graduate of IIT Madras and IIM Ahmedabad, he co-founded Eklavya School Ahmedabad, ranked among the top schools in the country by Education World, after a brief stint at IBM. He is a member of a number of state and central government educational committees in India and an invited speaker at various international educational conferences. Welcome, Mr. Sridhar. Moderating this discussion is none other than Dr. Madhav Chavan, co-founder of Pratham Education Foundation and a visionary in the field. Madhav has excellent moderation skills, and so he gets assigned this role every year. Welcome on stage, sir. Okay, over to you. We have about 45 minutes for the discussion, including questions and answers at the end.
Skills are growing in the country. 45 minutes and 5 people. So I was telling the panelists कि मैं तो सवाल पूछने वाला नहीं हूँ, मैं शुरू कर देता हूँ और जो आपको वो मन में आए बोलिए. All are intelligent people, very well informed people. I don't know whether they mentioned in the introduction who Amarjeet Sinha is. But Amarjeet has been a contributor to the education sector for a long time. अभी बुढ़ापा आया नहीं है, but जवानी में बहुत कुछ काम किया है आपने. So I would like to start with Amarjeet. I think, is this the first time you're coming to ASER panel? You've come before.
The panel first time.
Panel first time. You've been coming to the release, yes. So अभी इसको देखते हुए अभी आई एम गोइंग टू मिक्स हिंदी एंड मराठी. अरे हिंदी एंड इंग्लिश थोड़ा थोड़ा, मराठी नहीं. You are welcome to mix or not mix, whatever you want. क्योंकि जो लोग यूट्यूब पे देखते हैं वो कंप्लेन करते हैं यार आप लोग अंग्रेजी में बोलते रहते हो, एंड देयर आर पीपल इन द साउथ हु से आप लोग हिंदी में बोलते रहते हो. सो फिगर इट आउट. ओके, सो इतने सालों से हम लोग इसके पीछे पड़े हैं. सर्व शिक्षा अभियान, आप लोग तो सर्व शिक्षा अभियान के फाउंडर्स हो, तो वहाँ से लेके आज तक जो हो रहा है, व्हाट डू यू सी? Ashish laid out an economic perspective and combined it with the education. आपको क्या लगता है क्या हो रहा है?
Thanks, Madhav. Congratulations to the Pratham team, the ASER team. Not easy at all to sustain it for 3 decades and 2 decades with the ASER report. And a large public purpose being served by that. So hats off to all of you. Farida, Rukmini, Madhav, Vilima, all of you. Outstanding work. I'm reminded of our own journey. Anuradha is somewhere in this audience today. We were co-partners in putting together the public report on basic education, the probe report, 1996, released in 1999. And I still remember at that time, we had looked at states like Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, UP, and compared it with Himachal Pradesh as a better state, where some form of schooling revolution had happened. And finally, what we wanted to say was, everyone talks about children not in school, but where are the schools? Where are the teachers? Where will they go to? That was the question in 1999 when the probe report came out. We have moved a lot since then, but it's always good to remember where we began from. And it's important because many a time, it's quite right that we get restless with where we have reached or not reached, but we also need to know how much we neglected primary education in our first 4 decades. Perhaps the most simple evidence for that comes from the 42nd round of the National Sample Survey in 1986-87. I'm not talking about 1947, 1986-87. 69.23% 6+ females in rural India, 69.23 6+, means all of them above that age, never enrolled in a primary school in rural India. This is 1986-87. If I go by that, 71st round 2014, there was a clearly boys or girls, rural or urban, attendance rates were identical, meaning thereby that some change had happened. While major successes are there when it comes to participation, vulnerable social groups, all social groups, we find, but the quest for learning kept eluding us. In looking for answers, I'll just say 3 or 4 small bullet points. The most critical, I think, the decentralized community action, we are still weak on it in India, especially in education. I don't think it's just a function of what the teacher does in the class. It's a function of what the village or the society chooses to move forward with. The commitment to learning outcomes, a much stronger one, community accountability and support to the school going together. We are still a little reluctant on the accountability bit. I'm as much pro-teacher as anybody is, that many of them working very hard, but doesn't mean that we are not in an accountable frame. The second thing which strikes you as very, very critical and important, and again, some of these points have been said by others. Lucy Cairns, a British teacher in a school, wanted to see why some countries do well on the PISA score. She traveled to Finland, she traveled to Shanghai area of China, she traveled to Canada, she traveled to Japan and South Korea. And what she saw and what she wrote about, first and foremost, are we preparing children for schools? Your focus on that age group here is a very, very critical one. Shanghai area, Finland, Singapore, none of them allow the child to get into school before age 7. They do nothing academic before that, but that's the preparation which they do, which is very, and this is what has been highlighted here. The national policy rightly has talked about the 5-3-3-4, but we need to invest much more. It will not come cheap. Nursery teachers, well trained, not to thrust academics, but to actually build partnerships for, teaching how to learn. The other point which comes out very strongly is the teacher professional, the teacher professional, where are we on that? I think that's one point which has taken a hit from the early times to now. The social prestige of a teacher, for many factors, including emoluments, there could be many other factors. It's like an advertisement somewhere where you want a teacher in 10,000 rupees, but you want to pay the guard for the night duty 18,000 rupees. I think some of these issues need to be resolved. And we need a far larger workforce even now, because in many schools, even today, this challenge of getting the right numbers is a very real one. The last point that I wish to make, assessments. We seem to be neglecting the assessments bit. I'm not meaning only academic. Whole lot of co-curricular and other assessments. While many pilots have been there, we need to do more. And the messages, if I look at evidence, why is it that states which have decentralized, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Goa, Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, why do they do well on health, sanitation, and human development indicators? Why are the same states having the highest per capita consumption expenditure, which is a proxy for incomes? Why does private investments go to those states on a much larger scale than others? The answers are very clear. Decentralization with untied financing is the way forward, and we don't seem to be doing enough of it. We need to do much more of it. We are at a time and an occasion in 2024. The children are ready, the parents are ready. We need that additional support, and technology as a means is a great blended learning opportunity for all of us. If we are able to put our acts together, I, for one, am absolutely optimistic that the learning outcomes, luckily we have got out of the COVID learning poverty and moving in the opposite direction, again, the positive direction. But if we really want a quantum jump, we need to address decentralized community action. We need to address community accountability and teacher support together. And most of all, we need to address how technology, even an average teacher today can give a good lesson, because they have enough material at their command to be able to do so. Can we support that average diligent teacher with e-tech materials which actually enhance teacher performance in the class? Thank you.
Amarjit, we would love to hear more from you, but you brought in the point of assessment. So I would like to take advantage of the fact that we have a master assessor, Sridhar, here. So Sridhar, what are your thoughts? And Ashish also talked about examination reforms and all that. So I know assessment and examination are two different things, but what would you like to say? And if you talk too much, I'll stop.
Sure.
You, I mean, not me.
No, I too would like to start by congratulating the Pratham and ASER team. I think the most difficult thing in life is this kind of consistency. And we were just discussing how, funders might say that what's new in the ASER report, but I think repeating that same thing again and again, if it's the same thing, unfortunately, is equally important. So, and that's difficult. So congratulations for that. I think that's really important. The 7 habits of Stephen Covey, he says, be proactive. Then he says, begin with the end in mind. And then he says, put first things first. So I follow that. And I say that begin with the end in mind is the board exam reform. And some years back, we realized, so we ran a school in Ahmedabad for a number of years. And there was a point where we did not have the class 9 and 10, when the school started from grade 3 and 4. And each year we added a class. And we found that things were great. The teachers could do what they wanted. The kids were learning. We were focusing on the things we wanted to focus. And the moment we had the 9th and the 10th, everything changed. So that everyone started focusing on how is the school doing in the 10th. And then they said, okay, but for us to do this in class 9 and 10, you need to do this in class 8. You have to ask questions in this way, and children have to answer in this way. They cannot think and name 3 things made out of wood. They have to mention the 3 things written in the textbook. So what happens is that we may think that board exams and FLN are not connected, but actually they are, because that's what, when the child gets a message that they don't need to learn to read because they are kind of grading, moving on to the next grade, that's a pervasive message, and that's coming from the rote learning that the board exams are creating. And I mean, I just want to point out that some of our exams have become more rote, and there are a lot of reasons for this. There's competition between the boards, there's marks inflation, some of which has been studied, But it's a very, very clear trend where we find that if our board exams focused on understanding, this is going to have a downstream effect. So that is one aspect of assessments. The second aspect is, of course, assessments measuring understanding. And I think ASER is a beautiful example. At the lower grades, being able to read, being able to do subtraction, division. But as you come to the middle school, understanding concepts as opposed to just doing what's in the textbook. So these kinds of things have a huge impact. I was in Dubai last week, and there we work with schools. There are two interesting things I want to mention here. We've been assessing in India and Dubai, in India from 2001 and in Dubai from 2005. And for the first 8 to 10 years, we were also surprised, the average of these schools in Dubai was lower than the Indian average. We thought Dubai is a rich country, but we were told if you look at the Indian population that goes there, it's not surprising that their learning levels, and you look at the schools, they're large schools, but not really focusing on quality. It's Indian teachers, by the way, largely Indian students, and we actually found that the learning levels were lower in those schools than the Indian private schools. And what happened around 2012-13, this flipped. And it's going on increasing every year. Dubai increased its rank on PISA from 51 to 19, roughly. And their performance now is higher than the Indian average. Same CBSE schools, ICSE schools. I'm talking of Indian schools in Dubai. Interestingly, the Indian schools in Dubai have improved more. And Dubai and the UAE are largely in Dubai. The Indian schools have improved more than the British and the IB and the other schools. So, and this is all under the same system, right? The same system that we have. So again, the learning that we find is a focus on improving, a focus on assessments. So why did this happen? And I know this because we are partners with the government there. So they kind of use these assessments to identify, okay, where are our schools weak, where are classes weak, and there is an accountability that, how have you improved in the last year? And out there it is that, you cannot increase school sizes and so on without making improvements on these. And here I find we kind of hesitate to take that last step. So we will have an SQAA, which is a school quality framework, but we will not have external assessments which kind of put pressure. And something like ASER is, like even Karthik's book says, right? Like ASER is good, but we will rely on the government report only, and that will have its limitations. But look, that's the official report. So taking assessment seriously, making changes based on this, I think can make a huge difference quickly, and all these pieces, starting from board exams, because that's what sets the tone of the school assessments. The only one point I want to add here is that you can't do these things right without deeper research into education. We call it the science of learning. What we find is that what is it the children are getting wrong? It's in the earlier grades, the basics are being missed. But as you go to middle school, you find that there are key conceptual gaps that have to be identified, and your assessments have to catch those things. So it's not just about assessments with typical questions at the back of the textbook, but understanding how do kids learn specific concepts in math, in science, in social studies, and so on, and assessing around that so that the learning focuses on that. Since we are seeing examples both within India and elsewhere in the same system where these changes have happened, we're very, very hopeful that this can happen. The intent seems to be there, so I think it's about getting the mechanisms, the funding, the research, I would say, and the quality of the assessments right. But I think ASER 2024 also shows that early signs of this change are visible. So I think that's a good part of it.
I want to pick up at some point during the discussion today the issue of accountability that Amarjit brought up, you also brought up, because it's a very important issue. And who's going to bell the cat? I mean, where is the cat in the first place? So we'll come there. But Deepika, what is your education technology, your early childhood? What would you like? Take your perspective and run.
So maybe I can just pick it up from who needs to care and belling the cat. And I want to give an anecdote, actually, which is a Pratham anecdote in the early years. Smithin and Samyukta, who may or may not be in the room, have a story to tell in the context of school readiness melas in the early years. This is a very, very important one. If you look at the report card they have, it's a very playful, joyful report card. Doesn't look like a report card, it looks like a bunch of games. This story is about a mother who has brought her child to be enrolled into school and goes through all the little activities that need to be done in order to say this is the level of the child. The child has been asked to skip, and the child is marked as she cannot skip. Now, a specific question of who's accountable, who needs to care, gets answered here, where they mark it as the child cannot skip. This mother goes back home, brings a skipping rope, gives it to her daughter, who's about this high, and says, skip. I know she can. And demonstrates to the school that the child can. So the question of accountability to me in a context like this, particularly in the early years, who needs to care, is perhaps the one who's closest to the child. And in this instance, that mother was her daughter's advocate. And when we speak of the early years, the biggest and perhaps the most important opportunity in front of us, which is being demonstrated, is about parents, their sense of feeling empowered in the learning journey of their children for the 3 to 8, and I don't want to limit to a 3 to 6, because NEP talks about those 5 years as a continuum. And maybe the lens with which we have to look at it as a continuum of a certain way of learning because of the opportunity that it presents. And there is so much space for families, community to get involved in those first 5 years of schooling or preschooling or Balvatika. And this is simple to do. The reason why this is an important anchor point really is for the fact that it is simple to do. And then you can actually create a collective responsibility between both the school system, the preschool system, the Anganwadi system, and the community. Another data point which I think we cannot ignore is a first-time mother in 2025 is 21 years old. Average age of a first-time mother in 2025 in India is 21 years of age. So when was this mother born? 2004. She's a different mother. She's born into a world where she has access to things. She is learning on her own. A father will be 4 or 5 years older. Notwithstanding all the challenges, I think we need to put the visual of the voice of that parent with this visual in mind. Who is the parent we're talking about? And all of these, I think, are very, very critical to our work in the context of Bachpan Manao, particularly to actually create a narrative for the early years. The beauty of where we are today is all the pillars are in place. Look at this conversation we are having today. Early years enrollments are high. Everything is high. So we've got it all going. We have to get the narrative right. And this can't be done by one organization. It is a whole society challenge. And therefore, perhaps our attempt in the context of Bachpan Manao is to try a narrative. You may want to interpret it in your own way. By all means, it needs to be done. But this can do is something that in this age group of every member is something that we want to sort of talk about. As far as technology is concerned, again, 2025 versus 2014, very different world. And like Mr. Dhawan said earlier, right? EdTech had a certain flavor and a push earlier. But today we are looking at it much more nuanced. Much more circumspect. What problem can it solve? Whose life is it making better? With AI and all of that coming in to become much more use case centric, to say exactly what precise problem can technology help solve for the caring around child around the child, it should be our focus. And if I link it to the question of assessments, if we were to get sharper about, okay, we now know that there are problems. What needs to be done? Can that be something that can be universally accessible as knowledge that anyone can pick up and do? Can AI help you translate it in Indian languages? Can we do all of these other things? That's where I think our energy needs to go, because so many different pillars exist. And this is the direction which I really, really think we can do. Then lastly, we've talked about infrastructure. We've talked about digital infrastructure. We've talked about input. What does a thriving space for learning look like? What I love about the videos is the happy children. And that's what all warms our hearts. But we do know for a fact thriving spaces need active creation of thriving spaces and safe spaces for learning. And perhaps it's about color, it's about building, it's about teaching learning materials, but it's also about mindset and attitude of thriving spaces. I want to connect it to one thought, particularly with technology, where safe space for learning can be created for children who are struggling. And leveraging tools like AI to create those safe spaces. So you can actually feel more empowered in school with the learning language labs that are happening in Tamil Nadu with the Muligal program, where the AI intervention is actually doing some incredible work. So to look at some of these and say, what does it mean to create a thriving space? What does it mean to create a safe space? What does learning mean for the community and particularly the immediate family around the child? I mean, these are things that I think are exciting where we are, that we can actually do them now.
This is time to go to Jalaj Dani. We talk about education, we talk about holistic education, and the gentleman who's interested in education and sports and all sorts of things, you talked about children's spaces, safe spaces. I think with what you are doing, Jalaj, you're trying to reclaim spaces for children. You want to say something about the connection between sports, education, holistic education, and whatever you see in Pratham. So ASER only measures reading, writing, arithmetic. Would you like to add something to ASER next year?
Not writing. Not writing.
Sorry?
Not writing.
Okay.
No, first of all, how do you complete a run in cricket when the person on the other side also comes over and crosses? And I think it's all about partnerships. It's not about only one person scoring 100, but there is somebody on the other side helping out. And I think 30 years and 20 years would not have happened without all the partners. So I just want to acknowledge all the partners that are in the room who have held the hand of Pratham. So let's hear it for them, please. The benefit of coming last to speak is you have an opportunity. Okay, no, you have the opportunity of hearing and putting together what has come through so far. So two things I have sort of missed out hearing, and one of them Madhav has already referred to, and one more I want to speak about. So the first is all this that we are measuring here, it's important. We also talked and heard about education and skilling also from Ashish, which is important. But it's all about life skills. And there is no better place for children to learn that than in sports. Resilience, being a team player, helping out others, coming back better next time around when you get an opportunity. You can't ever blame the field of play. It's all about you. Lots of things you learn in the field of sports. And one has always felt, with due respect, and that's a shout out Madhav just made, and 2 years ago he came to us and said, there are these missing pieces, and is it the right time to include some of that? And to us, it was music to our ears, because we felt a platform like Pratham, which is globally recognized and acknowledged, if we can bring in, are there facilities for children to play? Are there physical education teachers? We heard a little earlier about the pay that teachers have, but who actually wants to have a career being a PE teacher in a school. Or we heard about assessments. And we see that even budding athletes in the grade 8th or 9th, because of pressures that parents have, will they get into the right academic program, and will they have job security if they just continue to play, versus should they be pursuing sports. What we just now heard about the joy, the word is play. I think just enrollment numbers that we have seen with midday meals and things like that. But wherever we have rolled out these programs, and with Pratham, we have attempted to do that in 3 states in the last 2 years, across 300 schools. But we as a foundation have been doing it for 7 years across 4 lakh children. What the kids come back with, they are just so much richer. And at the same time, when we talk to various stakeholders, they still feel, why are you going to the aspirational districts and doing this when they have struggled on so many other areas? But वो बचपन ही बाद में बचपन नहीं रहेगा अगर हम खेल नहीं पाएंगे, हमारे पास वो सब यादगार नहीं रहेंगी. तो वो बहुत ज़रूरी हो जाता है कि हम जाके खेलें, हम जाके खिले. जो बताते हैं कि खेलोगे खिलोगे तो बनोगे लाजवाब, वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है. और वो भी कहा है कि आप पढ़ोगे लिखोगे तो बनोगे नवाब, वो भी बहुत ज़रूरी है. तो ऐसा मैं नहीं कहूँगा कि हमें ऐसा एक सिलेक्ट करना चाहिए दूसरे के सामने एज अ पेरेंट और एज अ चाइल्ड, लेकिन ये बहुत ज़रूरी हो जाता है कि हम ये दोनों परस्यू करें. दूसरी एक बात मैं बताना चाहूँगा एज अ कॉरपोरेट, टेक्नोलॉजी का जो सर्वे हुआ है उसमें भी सपोर्ट करने के लिए, लेकिन मंथली पेचेक में से गिविंग करने के लिए, और उससे भी ज़्यादा वॉलंटियरिंग. माधव, आशीष जैसे बहुत कम लोग रहते हैं जो बहुत पहली सक्सेसफुल इनिंग छोड़ के फिर दूसरी इनिंग चालू कर सकते हैं और उसमें भी वो खिलते हैं. लेकिन बहुत लोग ऐसे हैं जो शनिवार को, जो शाम को, जो 15 दिन छुट्टी लेके काम पे से सपोर्ट कर सके संस्थाओं को. उनके पास अलग अलग स्किल्स रहती है जो वो दे सके, और वो जो टाइम स्पेंड करते हैं वॉलंटियरिंग में, उससे जो टाइम देते हैं उससे ज़्यादा खुशी हमें मिलती है. और वो रियलाइजेशन काफ़ी लोगों को हुआ है. और प्रथम नेशनल फुटप्रिंट है. अभी वो भी हमने सुना कि स्कूल्स को कंसोलिडेट करना चाहिए, तो और भी आसान बनेगा वॉलंटियर्स. और कॉरपोरेट्स पूरे भारत में छाए हुए हैं, तो हम लोग थोड़ा टाइम निकाल के, काफ़ी CSR का फंडिंग तो आता ही है, उसको अलाइन करके एजुकेशन में ज़्यादा टाइम दे पाएँ तो बहुत एनरिचिंग रहेगा. और हमने देखा है बच्चे ग्रेजुएट होते हैं, पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट होते हैं, उसके बाद भी जाते हैं सोशल स्पेस में थोड़े साल के लिए, लेकिन दोनों को एग्जिस्ट कर सकता है और दोनों एक साथ कर सकते हैं. वो मेरी एक दूसरी अपील रहेगी.
You came in last in the first round, so you'll go first in the second round. So one, and you brought it up yourself, क्योंकि ASER के लिए fund raising करना was the most difficult thing for us for many years. Now Rukmini has been pushing it, and this year I think we have raised a substantial amount of money from Indian sources. Anything that you can say, others are welcome to say it too. What will make ASER a completely Indian-funded survey?
I personally think it's...
Bell and the cat.
I personally think it's shameful that it is not fully Indian-funded survey. I think my heart reaches out, and kudos to Pratham USA for the kind of wonderful work that they have done for decades. I think it's learning for any social organization that comes to me for fundraising on how to raise funds outside of India. I think that's a great thing. but sometimes your strength becomes your weakness. So I think we at Pratham have become dependent on that. But there is a question around, are you making me look bad by doing these surveys? And lot of donors in the past have shied away from that, wanting to put up their hand. Last 2 years in Pratham, we have tried breaking up this large amount by looking for people to write checks at a state level surveys, so they are more bite-sized contributions. Also, CSR committees need to look at it very differently, because a lot of funding comes from there, but whether this is the place where we should be writing the check. So we have reached out at Pratham with lots of philanthropy foundation, personal foundations, where they can take medium term bets and allow innovation. Rukmani has been talking about many pilots where CSR money is not possible. And I think ASER is one of them, where if we can demonstrate more impact, I think over a period of time, more long-term funding will definitely come in. But this is something holding the mirror back to समाज, वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है और इसको निरंतर करना चाहिए और वो जवाबदारी जिम्मेदारी हमारी सबकी बनती है ये करने के लिए। और मैं और भी फिलैंथ्रोपिस्ट आए हैं काफ़ी लास्ट ईयर और कॉरपोरेट्स, उनको और भी अपील करूँगा कि ये और भी मदद दे, क्योंकि स्कूल्स, कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग, लर्निंग मटेरियल वो तो सब हम करते ही रहते हैं, लेकिन वंस इन अ वाइल ये मिरर होल्ड करना और देखना कि हमने कितना प्रोग्रेस किया है लुकिंग विद इन, वो भी बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट हो जाता है। और ये डेटा बहुत साइंटिफिकली एग्जॉस्टिवली गैदर किया जाता है, उसके लिए काफ़ी रिसोर्सेज की ज़रूरत पड़ती है और ये हमें सभी को ही इसके लिए योगदान देना होगा।
Okay, going by the 45-minute deadline, अभी 3 लोग जो बचे हैं, हर एक को अगर 2-2 मिनट दें तो कैसा होगा? Who wants to start? Everybody wants to come last.
नहीं, मैं 2 चीज़ें कहना चाहूँगा जो शायद हम सब कर सकते हैं, जो ज़रूरी होगा अगर हम चाहते हैं कि भारत के बच्चे सही में अच्छी तरह पढ़ें स्कूल में। एक ये है कि हमें क्या लगता है कि सभी बच्चे सीख सकते हैं और बहुत अच्छा सीख सकते हैं। ये एक सोसाइटल पॉइंट है। अगर आप गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में जाओ या प्राइवेट स्कूल में भी जाओ और आप टीचर्स से बात करो या पेरेंट्स से बात करो, ये लगता है कि जो बच्चे किसी टाइप को बैकग्राउंड से आते हैं या जिनके पेरेंट्स एजुकेटेड नहीं हैं, वो नहीं कर पाएंगे। मतलब ये बहुत जल्दी आ जाता है। आई वुड से आप बात करो तो 10 मिनट के अंदर ये कहीं ना कहीं सुनने को मिलेगा कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं, हम अपनी तरह से कोशिश कर रहे हैं, लेकिन ये बच्चे इस तरह से, आई मीन होमवर्क तो छोड़िए, बट ये उस बैकग्राउंड से आते हैं कि ये नहीं होता है। ये एक देखा गया है कि जहाँ पे ऐसा सोचने का मिलता है कि वो नहीं कर पाएंगे, वहाँ पे वो अचीव नहीं होगा। और मैं मानूंगा कि ये एक सोसाइटल थिंकिंग है जिससे हमें बाहर आना है। दिस इज़ पॉइंट नंबर 1। पॉइंट नंबर 2 ये है कि जब कोई पिछड़ा हुआ है, वेदर इट इज़ फॉर सोशल रीजंस, इकोनॉमिक रीजंस, द एरिया दैट दे आर कमिंग फ्रॉम, क्या हम उनके लिए स्टैंडर्ड्स थोड़ा कम करते हैं ताकि वो जल्दी से आसानी से पहुंच जाएं, या हम स्टैंडर्ड्स को वहीं रख के उनको सपोर्ट करते हैं? जैसे अभी भी 1 एग्जांपल कि CBSE ने कहा है कि मैथ्स में तो होता ही था कि सभी सब्जेक्ट्स में हम अलग लेवल्स ऑफ एग्जाम्स रखेंगे, मैथ्स A, मैथ्स B वगैरह। Many countries do it, US does it, UK does it, लेकिन those are not the top performing countries. They are not the countries जहाँ पे बच्चे सही तरीके से अच्छा सीख रहे हैं। जैसे हमने एक मैसेज दिया, यूपी में तो 10th में मैथ्स ऑप्शनल है बोर्ड एग्जाम में, हम मैसेज क्या ना, उसका आइडिया था कि बहुत सभी बच्चे बोर्ड एग्जाम ख़त्म करें, मैथ्स की वजह से वो नहीं करते हैं, इसलिए मैथ्स को ऑप्शनल करें। लेकिन एक बहुत बड़ा सिग्नल जाता है कि आप मैथ्स नहीं कर सकते हो, और जब से हम ये स्टैंडर्ड कम करते हैं, we cannot achieve the kind of learning levels that we want. So these are two things I just wanted to say, ki beyond government, beyond this societal thinking that everyone can achieve the basic levels which are, which are same for everyone. That is very important, starting from, FLN levels being achieved to the highest, like the board exams. So, I just ये बात कहना चाहता था.
Amarjit, on the subject of decentralization, what are the major obstacles? I mean, I know political, administrative, yes, but do you think the Indian communities, villages are ready for this kind of decentralization?
Yeah, today I can say they are ready, 2024. They were not ready 20 years ago. I'll explain why. In Rajasthan, when they had taken up the educational reforms, they called it fixing the highway. Before you have programs after programs, fix the highway. The paradox that we have is that primary education is part of the 11th schedule and 12th schedule for urban areas, which means local governments have to do it. But the financing of primary education comes from central government and state government because local governments don't have money. In this kind of a paradox, the federal principle and a partnership of the three levels becomes very, very critical. Brazil, when it did universal primary education, for the next 5 years and later 10 years, the national, provincial and local governments knew how much money they have to provide. We need a partnership where these are worked out in details among the center, state and local governments. Next 5 years, if I want to do FLN, if I want every child in school and learning, this is what we have to provide. Number two, it is not just government financing, and completely agreeing on the partnership principle that Jalaj talked about. Very clearly, the evidence is that if you don't have non-governmental or civil society partnerships at the school level, it will not go beyond a point. Very clearly, there is evidence if you look at schools. Giridhar's book from Azim Premji Foundation, where he visits 120 of the good schools where the foundation had worked. And what is common to 120 stories? Community connect of the headmaster. That is what made the difference. The related point with this, along with the fact that untied funds is a major source. When SSA Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was designed, we planned for a very large component of untied resources for the teachers and the school to decide. Now, if suppose all the corporate social responsibility work of the corporates, whichever say, I've been advocating it in my own way with the Pradhan, with Srijan, good NGOs working on water, sanitation and other things, कि बाकी सब करो लेकिन स्कूल, आंगनवाड़ी और health facility को मत छोड़ो. The panchayat and their involvement, the kaya kalp of a school infrastructure, because a lot of SSA constructions are now 20 years old. Many schools need physical rejuvenation as well. A school must be attractive, as we saw in the films. Now, I think it's a very, for the panchayat, it is much simpler. They have untied funds. But we don't assign a role to the panchayats in the management of schools as we ought to. But their arbitrary authority exercise is checked by the presence of women's collectives in very large numbers. The women's self-help group movement under the livelihood mission is now across the country. It's pan-India, almost in every village. Now, they play a countervailing positive role, and where they and the panchayats together start working with the school, results are bound to come. So I think that point also, Lucy Cairns makes the point. We should not be giving in every time. Aaj maths fail bhi chalega, ye fail bhi chalega, wo fail bhi chalega, fir bhi pass bolenge. Diluting standards is not the way forward. None of these countries who do well in PISA have done that. You see what more support you need. Thank you.
Okay. The last entry, open field. What do you feel after listening to everybody and looking at the report?
I just want to anchor on 2 points. One is our ability to see growth. And I think I want to break this up from the perspective of what we want as a society to see growth in the first 5 years of the schooling experience. And if we're able to see growth of the child, and I don't want to bring the word assessment into this age group, because we talk about holistic growth, right? If we're able to see this as a society, then we will be able to see that the child is growing in all spaces, school, outside, home, all of that. So can we make, because we talk so openly about the idea of this becoming a movement, can we make the possibility of seeing growth in the first 5 years of the foundation of learning as a very common way in which you see growth of every child. So you don't all have to reach the same point at same destination at the same point, but broadly can we get there? So can we make seeing growth in the first 5 years in the most creative way possible, so we can all see it and recognize it like that? So that really is something that should be something that we could put some energy into. And secondly, teachers, right? Now, because of the way the NEP is structured and so much emphasis on community and teachers, what does it mean to empower teacher to solve a lot of her own problems? And teachers are learning in their own way. They're doing courses provided by the system, but they're also finding other ways to learn and grow. And like I said, your teachers are also going to be the ones that were born in the 2000s or the late 1990s. So their method of learning and growing is very different from what we've been used to. So and sort of just looking at solving for safe space for learning for teachers is a huge part. And one word of caution perhaps for my sort of thinking about preschool particularly, a little worry, I don't know whether this is well-founded, is to avoid the schoolification of the first, the 3 to 8. The dangers of schoolification of that is fairly significant. So we have to create a new paradigm of acceptable, playful, holistic growth and learning, which is sort of a little missing piece in our cultural imagination also. And if we accept that foundation, the rest of it will fall into place. And be very, very sharp about the AI use cases that we want to solve for. What is it unlocking? Is it empowering? How will it empower? And yeah, and that's the quest we are on at Step with all of you in many different projects, actually.
Okay. As a board member of Pratham, you get the last chance.
No, thanks, Madhav.
So you have to summarize as well. Please go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to share one more thing that Pratham has been trying in the last 2 years. Something both you and Rukmani have been encouraging is a nursery in Bihar, where we have identified girls from all kinds of backgrounds, and if given opportunity, have done so well as a team that they have gone and even done well at the national level. And it's just a simple platform and recognition program with a little bit of assistance if it's provided. And we talked of विकसित देश की हम बात करते हैं तो उसमें भी स्पोर्ट्स का बहुत महत्व रहता है. और अब सचमुच हमको 2036 में ओलंपिक्स होस्ट करना है. तो ओलंपिक्स होस्ट करना तो बहुत आसान चीज़ है मेरे मुताबिक. मेडल्स जीतना बहुत डिफ़िकल्ट है. और हमने अभी भी देखा पेरिस में हमें कितना उसके लिए डिस्टेंस कवर करना है. तो वो शुरुआत आज से करेंगे तो 20 साल 10 साल के बाद वो डिफरेंस देखने को मिलेगा. आई कांट summarize the way you can, Madhav, so I won't attempt.
No, I can't summarize either. Anyway, thank you all for coming. हर साल What? नहीं पैनल तो कंक्लूड करो कि नहीं. So questions पैनलिस्ट को. ये इतना बोलेंगे अभी तो रुक नहीं पाएंगे फिर. Okay, चलो. Let's take how many questions? 3. Okay, 3 questions. 1, 2, anybody else? 3. So, आप शुरू करिए पहले.
Yeah, thank you. I am Pradeep Chaudhary. I am a faculty at JNU. I teach at Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies. I often use ASER data, so it's very interesting. But when I do this rural stories, build up rural stories, I often think about urban children. So how do they do actually in that case? Even if there is a greater divide of private schools in urban areas, so is there any plan by ASER? I just want to know because I'm not getting any source as a academics. So go ahead with the urban. So that was just an expectation that I thought I should put. Thank you.
ये पैनलिस्ट के लिए है या यहाँ?
No, this is just, yeah. I think panelists also consist board members, so they can.
बाद में. Question number 2. First question is gone unanswered. Option में डाल दिया. Yes.
हाँ मेरा क्वेश्चन भी बिल्कुल सिमिलर ही लाइंस पे था. फॉर अ लॉट ऑफ अस लाइक ASER इज टेकन एज एन इंडिया सर्वे एंड दिस न्यूएंस दैट इट इज रूरल हाउस होल्ड. सो I've just been curious, मतलब what does panel think and what does Pratham think about like making it a whole India survey covering the urban poor as well?
Wilima is saying we will do it next year. No, there are some difficulties in the sampling of the survey. So we have not done it so far. So we would love to do it, but वो कैसे किया जाए इसके बारे में कोई there is no one राय about it. करना है तो सोचना पड़ेगा. Amarjit has a thought?
In fact, since Rukmini has raised the issue, one of the only pieces, very few pieces which have been written on urban education was written by you in a UNESCO volume many, many years ago. Clearly, I think, Professor, I completely share your this thing. This is a gap. And the challenges are quite different. There are bigger challenges in some pockets. They have urbanized, but the basic public services in those localities where they are, there is a geospatial issue, there are many other issues. So it needs to be looked at. Who looks at it is the issue, but we completely agree with what you're saying. We need a fuller picture.
Third question.
Thank you. It was wonderful to hear everyone, and everybody's concern for quality education, especially in the primary school area. I had to work in the same area. And thank you for bringing up that question that we should include urban, because then it gives us ASER. We don't need to look at any other report. We don't need to read UDI's report, nothing. We just go to ASER, we read one report, and we get full information. We talk about a lot of things. The one thing that I find that the number of teachers per school, there's a huge lack of teachers. So while we have everything, and we are all working in everything, the person who actually delivers whatever we are doing, that last point, the last mile, there's a lack of teachers. So I think that we should all also work in the area of supplying, whether permanent or temporary teachers, so that this point is covered.
On urban, I was wondering, now that the government is doing NAS, along those lines, why can't we do through it? It may not be ASER like household, but if 98% students in rural areas or children are in school, why can't we take a look at a school survey and at least come up with that? Because you've done some school surveys. What is your opinion? How different is urban learning level as compared to the rural ones?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges in urban education are much more. And like you have, many situations, migration, facilities, right? Space is almost never an issue in rural areas. So, but I agree with you that the idea, and of course the problem with schools is permissions, right? So every time, in fact, I think the reason, so we did a study in 2008 supported by Google, but the reason we never repeated is that to do one such study, you need the number of permissions go into hundreds, because it's not like one body can give you permission. You have to go to every level. Otherwise, like in most countries, one of the things, if government did it, is that if NAS has had issues. Some of them are getting resolved, but there have been papers that have talked about the issues with NAS. But one model that many people do is for the government to do the study, but to farm it out to agencies like ASER, which means that the permission is automatically given. Then I think it's a good idea. I think if working towards a model like that might achieve both the points.
Okay. 3 questions done. Shweta? 1 second. Huh?
Just this issue of teachers, I think you have raised a very valid point. Macro numbers may give us a picture, but at the school level, there are challenges. We are now engaged in a public report on secondary education, looking at 14 to 21, and we find it's a big challenge, subject-specific teachers and so on. But just as an example, the Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan many years ago, it's now for more than 20 years, they have had a policy, two things. One, no KVS shall have a vacancy. The appointments are done by the commission, but the headmaster and the school management committee is authorized that if there is any vacancy and the regular teacher is not come in, anybody who's qualified at that level, trained, everything, can be engaged ad hoc for the period that the teacher is not there. We've reached a stage after teacher eligibility test and everything, which is now across states, to think in terms of that kind of a situation where a school and the school management committee is authorized to fill up ad hoc till such time as the regular teacher comes there. Because a school without a maths teacher, science teaching, for example, the variation across, we've just been doing the analysis, West Bengal, about 9.5% kids get a chance to do science stream in class 10th. You go to Tamil Nadu or Telangana, it's about 70%. So I think some of these issues are getting flagged when you start looking at school level. So I would completely agree with your question. It's a serious issue on which we need to take up.